The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court says he's seeing signs of an increase in atrocities in Sudan's Darfur region. The area has been a major flashpoint in the war between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The ICC's Karim said his investigators have been receiving information from Darfur that points to what he called an organized, systematic and serious attack on human dignity. He called on international organizations, national authorities and anyone with possible evidence to submit it to his office.
The evidence my office has collected to date seems to show credible, repeated, expanding, continuous allegations of attacks against the civilian population, in particular, attacks directed against camps for internally displaced persons. It seems to show the widespread, prevalent use of rape and other forms of sexual violence. It seems to disclose consistently the shelling of civilian areas, the looting of properties, and attacks against hospitals.
Now, Al-Fashir, the state capital of North Darfur, is of particular concern, where the ICC's chief prosecutor is now investigating allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The city has become a new front in the fight between the Sudanese army and the RSF. At the weekend, the medical charity Doctors Without Borders said Al-Fashir's last functioning hospital was forced to close after RSF militants opened fire on medical staff and patients. Most of them were able to flee the facility, which the paramilitaries looted. Now, according to new figures from the UN's International Organization for Migration, the ongoing fighting in Sudan has displaced more than 10 million people. It's warning that 70% of them are now trying to survive in places that are at risk of famine, including many children now living in places like here in the Zamzam refugee camp in North Darfur. Tens of thousands of people have also been killed since the start of the war a little over a year ago. Now, the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan says some estimates of the death toll are as high as 150,000. Thuraya, a 37-year-old mother, ended up in the Zamzam camp with her children after fleeing the violence in and around the city of Al-Fashir.
Our lives have become hard. We don't have anything, not even food for my children. Before, we were happy. We didn't have to buy food from the market. We just went there for clothes. We got our meat from livestock that we raised. But they stole all the livestock. When we arrived at the refugee center, they gave us a few things, but now they've run out. We thought the area here was safe, but even here there are strikes and bombing. Help us achieve peace. That's our only concern.
We're joined now by Kholood Khair, founding director of Confluence Advisory, which has a focus on policy relating to peace and security, economy and governance. Welcome back to the program, Kholood. Looking at Sudan, how are the army and the RSF able to operate the way they are with no accountability?
Well, frankly speaking, Sudan has not garnered the kind of international attention that it should have done. And so in many ways, this war is being prosecuted in the shadows of global attention. And this is not just because there are wars waging in Ukraine and Gaza. There have been wars waging in different parts of the world before, and Sudan had been a priority at the time. But Sudan has been, deprioritized by many different capitals. And because of this, you have sort of bad actors in the region that have been able to try and manifest their foreign policy objectives through the war in Sudan. And oftentimes what we see is this support is to the RSF or to the SAF, not only for reasons related to Sudan, but oftentimes related to the Sahel or the Red Sea. So, for example, you have the United Arab Emirates, which relies on the Rapid Support Forces as its executor in not just Sudan, but also in the Sahel. And you see Russia sort of playing both sides, primarily giving a lot of support through the Wagner Group, what is now called the Africa Corps, to the Rapid Support Forces, but at the same time, creating those kinds of relationships with the Sudanese armed forces in Port Sudan in order to shore up their interests on the Red Sea by negotiating for a naval base.
Right, because some people might look at this story and say, well, this is a domestic issue, this is something they need to sort out themselves. You're saying that the international community can have a greater impact when it comes to resolving the issue and bringing order back into Sudan.
Yes, I mean, much of this rests in terms of what comes next on what the Sudanese want. 5 years ago, there was a revolution. It called very much for de-Islamizing Sudanese political landscape and the economy, but also demilitarizing Sudanese political life and the economy. And that remains the case. But this war itself is increasingly taking on proxy characteristics. So, for example, the Sudanese armed forces has also been supported by the Iranians. And for them, it's also about trying to get a foothold on the Red Sea, separate to the one they already have through the Houthis in Yemen. And because of these proxy kinds of characteristics, this puts them immediately on a sort of collision course with the United Arab Emirates, who are supporting the Rapid Support Forces. And this increasing proxy nature of this war means that actually the resolution for this war is in large part in the hands of the international community. What we're seeing is an abrogation of responsibility across the board, not just for those who have stated interests, direct interests in Sudan, but also countries in the West, in Europe, and in the United States, and chiefly the United Nations, which has done very little to not only engage with the political dynamics of this war, but the humanitarian situation as well, and the famine.
You mentioned the famine there. The numbers are staggering in terms of the people at risk. When we hear from the aid organizations, the number of people who need food, the number of people who need attention, but also just the people at risk of violence. These numbers are staggering, but how can Sudan move up in the global agenda if we're seeing these numbers and nothing seems to be happening effectively?
Well, there are a lot of reasons why Sudan's not at the top of the global agenda, but one immediate one related to the famine is that a famine has not been declared in Sudan. And part of the reason the UN says that it has not declared a famine is because it feels that it has no data through the integrated phase classification system. That report from the IPC is meant to come out relatively soon, although we're hearing it keeps getting pushed backwards, perhaps into July, partially because it relies on data from one of the belligerent sides, the Sudanese armed forces, which of course is not going to be willing to give data that leads to a famine classification, because they want to very much put forward the notion that they are a government in charge and that they are responsible and are not sort of overseeing a famine in Sudan. Now, what this means is that the IPC data cannot be relied upon if it relies on one of the belligerent parties for that data. But beyond that, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence of famine. And I think that's a crucial point here. We can see already many parts of the country, particularly the refugee camps in Darfur, in the IDP camps, in Darfur, and other parts of the country, that famine conditions are present. The NGO Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, has already assessed that in different parts of Darfur, particularly around Al-Fashir, a city currently under siege, that there are famine conditions. The World Food Programme has privately assessed that there is famine and there are famine-like conditions in 39 different areas across the country. The data does exist. It is a political decision not to declare a famine. And by not declaring a famine, the right resources, both human resources and financial resources, cannot be marshaled in order to raise Sudan up in the terms of world priority.
Speaking of declarations, the UN has added both the Sudanese army and the RSF to a blacklist, saying they've harmed children during this war. What, to you, are the implications of such a designation? Is this enough?
No, it's completely meaningless unless there is more and more concerted and joined up action. For example, we have seen a plethora of different mediation platforms springing up since the war started. None of them have any great level of coherence, and none of them have brought any serious leverage against the belligerents and put that on the table. And so what that means is that you have at least two belligerents, although there are more, who now know very well that the world is allowing this war to continue, that the world is allowing them to use starvation as a weapon of war, that the world is allowing them to commit crimes against humanity and war crimes. So the world is allowing them to harm children and kill children. And some of these designations are meaningless, but some, in conjunction with others, can be quite impactful, and particularly if they're followed by action. What we need to see is several different countries, as well as multilaterals like the UN, the African Union, and the regional IGAD, to have a strategy towards Sudan. All of them have so far put forth a special envoy for the Sudan war, but none of them have, one, created a strategy for how they're going to engage with the different moving parts of this war, and two, have made enough concerted effort to work together so that the belligerents don't try and play them off against each other, which is a common tactic that they have used for decades.
Okay, Kholood Khair, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.